Okay, welcome to week 12. Week 12 is virtue ethics. And in terms of this week, I'm back to the videos. I'm sure you missed the video from last week, and it was devastating, but don't worry, it's here again. And actually, there's two videos, this overview and the week 11 recap. In terms of other events this week, there's 3 discussion board posts as usual, one of which I'm really interested to hear your input on. It asks you about what's working well or what's working poorly for you in terms of your short assignments. And I think responding to that is going to help you as well as your classmates improve. Because there is a third short assignment, the third and final short assignment, which is due by Sunday. Let's hope that's your best. Okay, so in terms of virtue ethics is a theory that really puts us in the middle ground. The essence of the theory is all about balance, about moderation, about a middle point between two behavioral and emotional extremes. The extreme of excess and the extreme of lack. And in a little bit I'll get to what that means. But it's different than the other theories we've studied this far. Certainly it is the middle ground between radical egotism, where all that matters is you, which we studied at the very beginning of the course, and it's also the middle ground between altruism, complete altruism, total giving of oneself to others, which we just wrapped up with. It's also different than the moral theories that we studied. Natural law, although it's probably most similar to natural law, utilitarianism and Kant. Here the emphasis is not so much on following a particular set of rules, but on becoming a particular type of person. Virtue ethicists really care about, and what really matters, is becoming a person with virtuous characteristics. So they're not going to give you a set of formulas to follow. They're not going to give you a set of rules to follow. They don't think that works. They think in real life it's too complex to develop a system that covers all issues and gives the answers to every moral problem. The reality with what we have to do in our moral lives is act virtuously. And what's really important is to develop a whole bunch of virtues so that in any situation we can apply these different virtues. It's like we have a toolbox and we have the different virtues at our disposal. Courage, patience, compassion, understanding, wisdom, generosity, justice, toughness. Any of these and many, many, many more would be virtues, tools in the toolbox. And the virtue ethicist, the really good person, is one who has these tools and can use them at the appropriate times. Which gets to 3 key elements of virtue ethics. 1 is education, 2 is habit formation, and 3 is the idea of role models. Because there is no formula that simply covers all situations. What we have to do is we have to be educated. We have to be educated in virtue. And part of education, part of what we need to know, part of what we need to be taught as young people, is virtues. We need to be exposed to situations in which virtue will be called forth. For example, if we're developing the virtue of courage, we need to be put in situations where our courage is tested. We need to be put in situations where courage is demanded. And slowly but surely, hopefully, we develop that virtue. We might think of patience as a virtue and say, we need to put kids in situations where they have to be patient, where it's going to be difficult for them to be patient, but they're educated to do that. And this leads to habit formation. So what I want all of you to do, if you're watching this video, is fold your arms. Now try to fold them the opposite way you normally do. It usually feels, for at least most people, very difficult, very awkward. And it's because we're in the habit of doing things a certain way. Earlier this summer I broke my leg and I realized that I always put my pants on one particular way. It was always one leg goes first. And it was my bad leg. And so really I couldn't do it, put my pants on like I usually do. But every time I put them on, for the first 2 weeks, I still put them on the same foot. I started that way because that was the habit. That's what I just did automatically. And even though I told myself before I was going to dress not to do it that way, I still 95% of the time did, because that habit was so ingrained in me. And so habits are very difficult to break once formed. And so virtue ethicists think that it's absolutely essential, absolutely imperative, that you develop good virtuous habits early. Because if you develop those good virtuous habits early, they will stay with you. And if you develop bad habits, vicious, vice habits early, those will also be very, very hard to break. And finally, role models. Role models are key because we don't have a set formula, because there's no kind of clear-cut way to address moral problems. Two virtuous people could disagree about what to do. We have to look up to role models. People that have lived virtuous lives, people that have dealt with morally difficult situations and found a way forward. And so role models becomes absolutely essential to look up to model our lives after, to ask what did they do. Okay, so that's kind of the first part of virtue ethics. And when we're talking about virtue ethics, it's also really critical to understand that feelings matter for virtue ethics. It's not simply doing the right thing, it's how you feel. And you can actually be a bad person based upon how you feel. And I think a kind of really great example of this would be road rage. And so, if you have road rage, and probably most of us have in this class, and you get really pissed off at someone, you're really angry, you can't control yourself, you're flipping them off, you're cursing at them, you're driving right up against their bumper, whatever it is that you do when you're in this rage. The virtue ethicist can say, look, you're a bad person, not simply because you're doing these things, but because of how you feel. Because you feel this rage, you're actually bad. And for most of us, that strikes us as odd. I can't be bad because of how I feel. But the virtue ethicist explanation for this is that because you feel that way, you haven't properly trained your emotions. You haven't properly habituated your emotions to be moderate. And so the problem with the rage is that you're out of control. It's taken over you. It's too much. And so this gets to the question of, well, what is a proper attitude? What are proper emotions? And the virtue ethicist response is that virtue, essentially, in proper emotions, is a middle ground, going back to the beginning of this video, between two behavioral and emotional extremes. And those two extremes are excess on the one hand and lack on the other. So, for example, with the idea of rage. Rage is an excess of anger, therefore it's wrong. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong to be angry. In fact, justified anger, righteous anger, is a good thing. It's proper. If there is an injustice, if something has happened that is wrong, that should not have occurred, well then, it is absolutely proper to feel angry about it, to try to address it. Now, that's the middle ground, because the lack in this case would be apathy, indifference. Who cares? What does it matter? Nothing I can do about it. That kind of attitude is a lack, and therefore that is also immoral. Think as well, I mentioned patience earlier. Patience is a virtue. It's a good thing. Now, the lack of patience, you could say, is impatience. You're always wanting things at once, always demanding things, always needing things immediately. And so that a lack is going to be actually a negative. And the excess of patience could be something like just passivity. Maybe there's not a single word for it, but overpatience. Where you just wait and wait and wait and wait. You're slothful, perhaps. Another good example, proper exercise. Exercise is good, it's a virtue. Healthy living in that regard. The lack would be laziness or poor health or gluttony or something like that. Whereas the excess could be someone who just, works out constantly. 2 times a day, a couple hours each time, ignores other responsibilities in order to just be as fit as possible. That could be the excess in that case. So another example here. Generosity. Generosity, giving, can be a good thing. The excess could be kind of just an excessive generosity, a kind of a showy generosity, a kind of a wastefulness and extravagance, giving beyond what is necessary. Whereas the lack could be kind of cheapness, stinginess, an inability to give. Now, we could look at a whole bunch of characteristics in human behaviors, and that's probably what we'll do in the next week, in terms of this model. But it's really kind of interesting to think about what this means, and to think about different behaviors and different attitudes that you have, and ask yourself where do they fall on the spectrum. Are they excessive? Are they the middle ground? Or are they lacking? And so that's where we're going to start off this week in terms of virtue ethics. This principle of moderation and balance. Becoming a particular type of person is really critical, and the idea of education, habits, and role models are key. And with that, good luck, enjoy the readings, and I look forward to your posts.